going to bring in the one and only, a former Gamecock. He's also a former gentleman who played at UCF as well, Vic Penn. Vic, welcome to the show, buddy.
Hey, thank you, guys. I appreciate it, and I really appreciate you considering me and having me on the show.
Man, I tell you, it's exciting. Man, you're a Gamecock, which whether you grew up in the lights in the South Beach of Miami Beach, Florida, down there in the Sunshine State, you spent some time and you paid some bills here in South Carolina. That kind of makes you an honorary Gamecock. Well, you're a Gamecock, but you're an honorary Palmetto individual as well. So we're glad to get you in here with us tonight. Of course, you also are the founder, the quarterback one, all of that with virtual QB training. We're going to get into that here later in the interview. But first of all, it's an honor to get you in here because tonight you are going to help me get these young men to understand, and some young women as well, of the hard battles that you had to face because you grew up at one of the bigger schools in Miami, right there at Miami High School. We talked about this earlier. I know everybody knows Booker T now. It's like that generation. Booker T now or years back, it's been kind of the most popular school, but in our generation, Miami High was a big deal growing up there. Vic, tell us a little bit about your days of growing up on South Beach, going from Little League to the high schools, and how the Gamecocks came calling for you.
Absolutely. Well, I was born and raised in Miami, and I played baseball all my life. And my dad wouldn't let me play football because he thought I would get hurt, and he was probably right. So I played baseball, but I always loved the game of football. Ever since I can remember 4 or 5 years old. When I went to sleep, I had Winnie the Pooh under one arm and my football under the underarm, under the other arm. But I went everywhere with my football, and I always played in the street. And if I didn't have anybody to play with, I would just throw the ball up to myself and catch it. So I always had a love for football, and I loved Dan Marino. And being in Miami, I was a Dolphin fan, and I started to watch Marino and how he threw the football. And he was always known for having a quick release. And I never really thought of how does he have a quick release. I just thought he moved his arm really quickly, or he just, threw it faster than other people. But it wasn't until I was about in 9th or 10th grade that I happened to be at one of my brother's karate instructors or karate lessons. And the karate instructor was telling me about the karate punch and how you step to the left and you throw the punch from the shoulder. And I started thinking, and that's exactly what Marino was doing, is he was not stepping towards the receiver and coming over the top like your regular quarterback. He was stepping to the left and he was throwing it quickly from his shoulder. So he was throwing that karate punch motion. And that's really how the quick release is best illustrated, because if you watch film of him and I copied him, I emulated him, and I tried to do everything in my quarterbacking to follow Dan Marino. So I was such a huge fan growing up that it's the step to the left and it's the throw. And it's not stepping towards the receiver and coming over the top like your traditional quarterback. So I didn't play football until my 9th grade year, and I was at Southwest High School. And all of my good friends and my childhood friends were going to that school, and very nice guys. But when I came up against Miami High that year, I think they sacked me 7 or 8 times, and it wasn't even close. I took such a beating in that game that afterwards, I told my dad, I said, "Dad, we have to figure out a way for me to get to Miami High, because that's who I want to play for." And they had a quarterback at the time, Wilkie Perez, who they got a lot of publicity. They call the University of Miami the U, and they call Miami High down there the High. So it's in high school, it was the equivalent to being at the University of Miami. And I just had to get there somehow. But I lived about 45 minutes from the school, and back then you had all the district rules, and you had to have an address in the district in order to play for that school. So I thought about it, and I finally convinced my dad to rent an apartment in that school district. And thank God I had a great dad, and he did. And I was able to use that address legally, ethically, and morally, in spite of Southwest wasn't too happy about it. But I knew I wanted to play football, and I knew I wanted to further my career, and I knew the best opportunity for me to do that was to get to Miami High. And so I did. I got there in the spring of my sophomore year, and I played in the spring practice and the spring game there, and then I started my junior year, and I started my senior year at Miami High. And our senior year was really something special. We finished 10-0 in the in our regular season. We were ranked number 1 in the state of Florida, and we were ranked number 9 by USA Today in the nation. And we were beating people, 55-0, 42-5. We were just blowing them out every game. And funny, the one game that we struggled was against Southwest, and when I had to play my best friends, and we beat them 14-7. And granted, we did have 5 or 6 touchdowns called back coincidentally, but we only won 14-7 that game. But everybody else we beat. And then the first round of the playoffs, we went up against Killian, who had the number 1 ranked defense in the state of Florida. And we lost in the first round. And we drove down to their 1-yard line with under a minute to play. And we had a phenomenal running back who ended up going to Michigan State, Cedric Irvin, who was Michael Irvin's cousin, Hall of Famer, wide receiver Michael Irvin. His cousin was Cedric Irvin. He was our running back, and he transferred over from South Ridge. So we all got to play together, and they stopped us 4 plays in a row from the 1-yard line. And we ended up losing that game by about, I think it was 5 points. But all we had to do was score the touchdown, kick the extra point. We would have won. And we drove 80 yards down to the 1, but they stopped us 4 in a row. It was one of the most amazing goal line stands I've ever seen. And it was one of about 3 games that I can remember in my career where I still haven't really gotten over it, because it was that painful to lose, because we hadn't lost yet, and we were favored to win the state championship, and it was Class 6A, and we just had such amazing talent on that team. I ended up signing with South Carolina. Said went to Michigan State. We had Ian Skinner, who was our running back, ended up signing with Florida. Carlos Aceguera signed with the West Virginia. And then the following year, our junior class, they were also starters at the time, of my senior year. We had several Florida State scholarships, a couple of other Florida scholarships. Marquand Manuel was on that team, and we called him Eminem. But Marquand Manuel was a safety for us, and he went on to play for the Gators, and then he went on to play for the Green Bay Packers and the Seattle Seahawks, and he actually won the Super Bowl. He's a Super Bowl champion. So we had a lot of talent on that team, and I ended up going to South Carolina, and I redshirted my first year. Learned a lot. I was fortunate enough to have some great coaches, and the starting quarterback at the time was Anthony Wright. And Anthony had a very prominent, very successful college career, and then he ended up playing 11 years in the NFL after that. So he was a very good quarterback, and after I redshirted, I became the backup quarterback at South Carolina. And I was, calling plays, or not calling plays, but signaling in plays, and I got some mop-up duty here and there if we were blowing somebody out or if we were getting blown out. And then against Tennessee, it was, I think, the 7th or 8th week of the season. We were in Neyland Stadium, and it was Peyton Manning's final home game. There was, I believe, a record crowd of 106,000 or 110,000 at the time, because it was Peyton's final home game. It was raining. It was on TV, and there was no way I was getting into the first half, because this just wasn't going to happen. So I didn't even have my ankles taped, and I'm just wet behind the ears. And Anthony, unfortunately, tears up his knee pretty badly early on in the first quarter of that game. So, they put me into the game, and they were a little hesitant to let me throw, in my opinion. John Reeves was my offensive coordinator. Brad Scott was our head coach. And I thought I got beat up when I was playing Miami High at Southwest. Tennessee, they took it to me, and they had Al Wilson and Leonard Little and some really good defensive players who ended up having very nice NFL careers also. But it was a great experience, and I ended up throwing my first touchdown pass to Jermell Kelly, and started the following week against the defending national champion Florida Gators. But this was '97, and Werfel and the Gators won it in '96. So I got to go start my first college game against the defending national champion Gators, and we played them pretty tough, and we executed very well on offense. And I think it went 14-14 into the fourth quarter. And Fred Taylor must have had about 1,000 yards and about 37 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. I threw another touchdown. I threw 2 touchdowns in that game, and we lost, I think, 41-21 or something of that nature. But it was 14-14, believe it or not, going into the fourth. And we played them really tough. And then the following week, we played Clemson, and same scenario. We played them, very, very tough, and we were leading most of that game. And then they came at the end and beat us. But I was able to get a lot of playing time, and was honored the 1997 All-SEC Freshman Quarterback of the Year, which, may not be that because it's a freshman, but I think there was a few other freshmen that were playing. Jesse Palmer for the Gators was playing that year, and a few other, I forget whom, but there were a few other freshman quarterbacks in the SEC that were playing. So it was an honor, and I was happy to receive it. But at the conclusion of that season, South Carolina let Coach Reeves and Coach Eason, the two coaches that really brought me in, and they like to throw the ball, and I like to throw the ball. So when they brought in the new coach, who was Chuck Reedy from Baylor, a great coach, don't get me wrong, great man, but his style was a little bit different than what I was, accustomed to, and play, especially at the quarterback position, because I like to be in shotgun. I like to throw the ball, 40, 50 times a game. But he was more of an option guy, and, fake the fullback dive and read the tackle and then pull it and run option. And they also brought in Phil Petty, who came in from South Carolina. I think, he was a high school. He came in the following year as a freshman, and Anthony was still on the team. He tore his knee pretty badly, but he was expected to return. And I just felt that with Coach Reeves gone and Coach Eason gone, that I wasn't part of their plans any longer. The first interview I heard on the radio with Coach Reedy, he had a lot of great things to say about Phil, who had never played yet. And don't get me wrong, I love Phil and I love Anthony to death. They're both still good friends of mine. But, they were talking about this quarterback controversy between Phil Petty and Anthony Wright. And I was just named the, All-SEC Freshman Quarterback of the Year. I played my butt off, and I didn't feel that I was part of their plans. So I decided to leave. And back then, I don't know if the rule is still the same, but back then, when you transfer from a Division I school to another Division I school, you have to sit out the year. You can practice with the team, but you can't play. So instead of going D1 to D1, I ended up getting a call from Jim Gush, who is one of my favorite coaches to this day, in Garden City, Kansas Junior College. And he said, hey, listen, why don't you come out here and play for a year? You get to play in games, and you get to keep your skills fresh. And then you get to get re-recruited all over again, just like if you're coming out of high school. You get to take your 5 visits. You can decide where you want to go after that. So it made sense to me, and I went out to Garden City, Kansas, which was quite the shock, having played in front of 110,000 people, and you guys know how Williams-Brice is. So having played in front of those types of crowds, to come back into a junior college where you're playing on a Saturday night and you're at a high school field, and it's cold and rainy and gloomy and dark, and there's, 17 people in the crowd, 14 of them are the parents. And it was, to be able to have to get over the, what's the word, the the sadness, not the sadness, but you're going from playing from South Carolina and 85,000, 90,000 people on TV, and then you're playing in Garden City, Kansas, and mud on Saturday night in front of, barely anybody. It was tough to get motivated for these games, but it really taught me a lot because I had no choice but to get motivated and still play football. So, I'm glad I did because I still have a lot of great friends there and from Garden City on that team. And, as you all know, you played sports. When you're on a team with people and you go to play games with them and you're traveling with them and you're practicing and eating with them and studying with them and, doing just about everything together, you guys, you really develop a bond as teammates, no matter which team it is. Even though I left South Carolina and transferred, I still have a very tight bond with all of those Gamecocks that continued to play there. And there was never any hard feelings that way. So because once you have that bond, it's tough to break. And, and people understand that there are situations where, players have to make decisions that, that's best for them. So I ended up playing we went 9-3 in Garden City, Kansas, and we got to play in a bowl game and we won the bowl game. And then I was able to get re-recruited, and Oklahoma was interested at the time, and there are a few other schools out Midwest. But when UCF called me, Coach Scott Fountain, who was an offensive coordinator / recruiter at the time, he called me and I spoke with him, and I was obviously very familiar with UCF being from Miami. And of course, Dante Culpepper was the quarterback at the time. And they were an independent school. They weren't in a conference at the time, and they were kind of in the building, mode, and they were determining whether they should go in a conference or remain independent. But the thing that struck my eye the most was that they opened up with Purdue, then Florida, then Georgia Tech, then Georgia. And there was, Bowling Green and Louisiana Tech, which aren't, bad schools also, but then it was Auburn. And they had a really good schedule that 99 year. So I knew I was going to be playing some big games. So nobody had played the quarterback position at UCF for 4 years other than Dante Culpepper, and he was just drafted by the Minnesota Vikings. And I didn't know too much about Mike Kruzak, who was their head coach. And he ended up calling me, and I spoke with him, and I started doing, a little bit of background on him. And he was a tremendous college quarterback for Boston College. And he played several years in the NFL and was Terry Bradshaw's backup quarterback for Pittsburgh Steelers. And one of the years where Pittsburgh won the Super Bowl, because it was right during that time that he played that they won back-to-back Super Bowls, Bradshaw got hurt, and Coach Cruz came in, and I think it's still a record, but he won 6 straight games coming off the bench and ended up going, and Terry Bradshaw came back in, and they ended up winning the Super Bowl again. But he's got 2 Super Bowl rings, so as a quarterback, and I thought that was pretty neat. So I ended up going to UCF, plus I'm from Miami, and I was being young at 18 years old and being out in Garden City, Kansas, being from Miami, it felt right, and the schedule was right, and they didn't have any. There wasn't another guy that there were some other quarterbacks on the team, but there wasn't. They were expecting me to come in and be the guy, and I like that because this game is a lot of politics and just you have to deal with it. So I like the fact that I knew that I was going to have a fair opportunity to play, and I got to UCF. And when I sat in that first meeting with Coach Kruzak, I was in awe because the way that he taught the game of football was completely different than anything I had ever been taught before in the 10 or so years of high school and 4 years or whatever it was, 9, 10 years that I had played with a few different coaches. Completely different than anything I had ever seen before. And by spending 2 years with him, it taught me a way to play quarterback that is not taught in high school for sure. Now, there may be exceptions, don't get me wrong, but for the most part, it's not taught in high school. And it wasn't taught to me at South Carolina either. And John Reeves is no slouch. John Reeves played 11 years in the NFL. When he left Florida, he was Florida's all-time greatest passer. He in the 70s, and he remained Florida's all-time greatest passer until Danny Werfel ended up beating his records. And he played 11 years in the NFL, and then he came in and he was coaching with Spurrier at the Gators. And our head coach, Brad Scott, was Bobby Bowden's offensive coordinator in the Charlie Ward and Danny Cannell years. And they were bright football minds, and they understood, but they played the game differently than Mike Kruzak did. And I didn't even know that there was a different way to play it, right? Until Kruzak opened my eyes, because the way that Kruzak did it was he taught the quarterback everything you needed to know about defenses. When I was at South Carolina, I knew a cover 2, I knew a cover 3, I knew a man-to-man, and that was about it. But there are so many other defenses that exist that defensive coordinators, I mean, it's like playing a lotto. Think of it this way. When you play the lotto, you have 6 or I forget how many numbers there are, but let's say there's 6, 7 numbers. There's 11 defenders on the field, and you can combo those 11 so many different ways. This guy goes up, that guy goes back, this guy goes here, that guy goes there. And you can make so many different combinations that they're really the types of defenses that defenses can play against you are endless because of the different combinations you can construct with 11 different players. So Kruzak understood that. So he would immediately, we'd be on the plane ride home and he's already, looking at film or, studying next week's opponent, because he was so good at watching their defense and learning what they did on defense and what their tendencies were, that he would teach us Monday, actually it would be Sunday because we didn't have Sundays off. South Carolina, we did have Sundays off, but Kruzak had us in there on Sunday. On Sunday, when we came in after the game on Saturday, he was already showing us the types of defense that our next week's opponent is going to play. And, when you get into that level of football and you're playing the Gators, you're playing these big schools, they mix things up all the time. And he was very good at, first of all, he was very good at the schemes offensively that he would run. He had very creative routes, very creative schemes that he would run that were designed to pull defenders in certain ways so that certain guys would be open in certain coverages. But what he did is he taught me how to read defenses. And he taught me that there are more than just your standard defenses. And you would look at, certain defenses. It didn't have a name. You couldn't say it was cover 2 or cover 2 because it was just something that their defensive coordinator came up with and schemed against us, that it really didn't have you couldn't look it up in a textbook and say, oh, there it is, cover, 2 cloud or whatever, It was something that in defensive coordinators are very good at doing that. So they come up with their own schemes. But he said, this is what they end up in after the snap of the ball. So I know that they look like they're lined up in cover 2, for example, when you come up to the line of scrimmage. And 50% of the time they remain in cover 2, but the other 50% of the time they do something completely different, even though they're showing cover 2. And they're all guys are moving around. He said, but just look at number 44 right here. You see how number 44, see where the hash mark is? See how number 44 is a yard to the right of the hash mark on this play? Every time he's a yard or a foot sometimes to the right of the hash mark, that's when they show cover 2 and remain in cover 2. And when he's a foot over to the right and he's actually standing on the hash mark, or he's just to the left of the hash mark or the right of the hash mark, that's when they show cover 2 and they drop into one of these crazy things that they're going to do. All right. So when you see that guy here, if I have a play called and they drop into this particular defense that he would teach us, that defense is going to stop the play that I called, Vic, and I could only be right a certain percentage of the time, because there's a certain percentage of that time I'm going to call a play in anticipation of what I think they're going to be in. But it's your responsibility as the leader and the field general to determine at the line whether or not I'm right or not. And if I'm wrong, get out of it and get into a play that's going to beat the defense that they're going to end up in. So he's very good at teaching us that. So when we're coming up to the line, I mean, you know, if you follow football, you hear of quarterbacks, or he's finally got the ability to audible, or they're giving him the ability to. Kruzak required us to audible. It was, if we missed an audible and we ran a play, even though he called it, and we ran a play and they came out on a defense that was going to stop that play, and we were supposed to recognize it based off the keys that he taught us, and we didn't change it, we were at fault as the quarterback, because it was our responsibility to get our offense out of a bad play and into a play that had a chance to be successful. And he was very good at that. So if, you know, I started watching these tapes a couple months ago during the coronavirus, you know, lockdown. Some of my old teammates asked me if I had any film. And I pulled them out of storage, and, you know, these 20-year-old tapes, and I'm watching them, and I just, how many times I audibled, and guys like Peyton Manning played the game of football that way, because if you were to watch Peyton, he was always changing the plays. He was Omaha this, and you know, tapping his head. He was always changing the plays, because that's the way Peyton played. The offense Peyton would run was dictated by what defense they were in. He didn't come out and say, we're going to run this offense because it's going to beat any defense. He would determine what the defense was going to end up in after the snap of the ball, and he'd call a play that would just beat that defense. And that's why he was able to be so successful. And it's a completely different way of playing. It's easier, to be honest with you, because I see it all the time. And even 20 years later, I still see it today, whether it be a high school game or a college game, and even an NFL game, where quarterbacks drop back, tremendous athletes, you know, 6'5", 260, can run 4.40s and throw the ball 150 yards. But when they hit that fifth step in their drop, you see a blank look. And there are so many quarterbacks out there that just don't know what they're doing. And it's not because they're dumb or not athletic or, you know, anything like that. In my opinion, it's because they're not taught and coached properly. And when they hit their fifth step in their drop, and they're not quite sure what to do, and if something changes a little bit out of the ordinary, they will take off running, they'll throw the ball away, they'll hold it and just get sacked. And, you know, I learned a lot of things from all of my coaches. And one of the things I learned very early on in high school was, as a quarterback, the longer you hold on to the football, the more bad things can happen. So I always played where I, you know, had a plan coming up to the line of scrimmage, and Coach Reeves at South Carolina was very good at making sure that you had a plan. And it was a little bit different than the way Kruzak did it. You know, I didn't really even care what the defense was in. I would look, and I would kind of, you know, maybe guess what they were going to end up in. But I really didn't know. And what I would do is I would drop back, and it would be, you know, look at this guy first. If he's not open, look at this guy. If he's not open, look at that guy. If he's not open, look at that guy. And to play football that way versus, I know this guy's going to be open because I called the play that's going to beat the defense, is completely different. And it gives you a tremendous amount of confidence that when I started the virtual QB training, one of the reasons why I did a virtual QB training is that I wanted to be able to give this knowledge back to as many quarterbacks as I could. And I really wanted to, I guess, revolutionize and help the game of football, because at the end of the day, it boils down to the quarterback, and the quarterback made plays. You know, and I look at the University of Miami in the last 20 years, and they have such tremendous athletes at the skill positions, but they haven't been able to have a quarterback, or they haven't been able to teach properly at quarterback properly since Ken Dorsey, a guy that can get the ball out of his hand and just get it to his skill players so that these guys can make plays. He doesn't have to run a 4.4. He doesn't have to be 6'5". He doesn't have to throw the ball 100 yards. He just has to have a mind and a plan and know what the defenses are going to do, know who's going to be open. And when you play that way, it's like playing in your backyard. All right, go down to the tree and turn left. You know, he's going to be there because you call as a quarterback at the line of scrimmage and a play that you know is going to beat the defense that they're going to end up in. And that's why UCF has always been, when Kruzak was there, always put up humongous numbers offensively. I mean, even before Dante. Now, they didn't go Division I until I think Dante's sophomore, junior year. And when I got there, it was Division I. But they've always, the quarterbacks at UCF, if you look them up, they've always put up big numbers. I mean, I think I threw 55 times against the Gators in the swamp and completed 37 of them for just about 400 yards and 3 touchdowns. And it's because I knew what I was doing for the first time ever playing football. I was confident when I dropped back and I knew what I was doing versus kind of looking around and seeing who was open and maybe trying to guess at it a little bit and get a feel, and maybe I was right. Maybe I had a philosophy here, you know, that this guy, one of these 2 guys or 3 guys are going to be open, you know. But with Kruzak's style, I already knew it was going to be this guy, you know. Now, there are always obviously exceptions to everything. Something could have changed. You know, I could have messed up or made a wrong read or something of that nature. But for the most part, I knew who was going to be open right from my first step, so I could hit my 5th step or my 3rd step or my 7th step and come up and throw on time and be accurate, because quarterback is also about timing and it's about rhythm. So when you hit your 5th step and you plant and you do your hitch and you come up, you want to throw right as you're right. If you hitch and then you come up and you're standing and you're holding the ball and your feet are now in, you know, not in that back hitch throw, you're less likely to be accurate because you don't have the rhythm you do, that when you come back and you hit your 5th step, it's kind of like a baseball player, you know, a shortstop fielding a ground ball, takes the shortstop, does a little hop, skip, and a jump and throws the ball. But if he does the hop, skip, and a jump and then stops and stands there and then tries to throw over to first, he's not going to be as accurate as if he feels that ground ball smoothly and it's all one continued motion and he throws the ball over to first, you know, nice and smooth, and it looks really pretty. And quarterback's the same way, because it's all rhythm. So when you hit that 5th step and you come up and you throw, your chances of being accurate are greatly increased versus hitting that 5th step, not knowing exactly what to do. Therefore, you don't throw it. Now your feet are flat and you're standing there, and maybe you're looking around and then trying to make a throw versus having that rhythm that a shortstop would have throwing first. And Kruzak's way allowed you to be able to throw on rhythm, and he was very big on rhythm also. It allowed you to throw on rhythm because you knew who was going to be open, because you called the play at the line of scrimmage, because you knew what defense they were going to be in, you know? And it just completely opened my eyes to the game of football in a way that I had never seen before. And, you know, I have been out of it for a long time. You know, I've been a financial advisor for a long time, and I never got into coaching. But when I tested it, the virtual training, and had a couple of my old teammates who have sons who are, you know, getting ready to play quarterback, and I tested the virtual training, and the difference from the first video that they sent me and then me coaching them via, you know, video or Zoom calls or telephone calls or however which way I decided to do it, because I do it differently every time, because every player is different. So I don't have it's like a defense. I don't have a standard protocol training formula that I do. I have to look at each quarterback and I have to assess each quarterback, and then I have to create something for that quarterback that I know is going to help him and it's going to convey the message to him so that he understands it, versus just saying, hey, do this, hold the ball there, do that, and having a textbook answer for everyone. I have to customize it for each quarterback because they're all different. Every single one of them is different. They hold the ball differently. They drop differently. They're taller. They're shorter. They're faster. They're slower. I mean, everybody has their own way of doing things. Everybody has their own great things, and everybody has the errors that they make. So when I started thinking about it from that perspective, it made more sense to me to be able to coach a quarterback virtually. Obviously, you have to have a coach on the field, but as far as off-season or during season type training, I'm not talking about the actual quarterback coach on the team. I'm talking about going to a local coach because a local trainer, QB trainer, that's going to be on the field with you versus being trained by someone who's 350 miles away. The natural tendency is to think that it's going to be better to be local. So that's what I was thinking. I'm probably talking too much, so sorry about that.
No. You did fine. You did really good. It's nice to finally sit back and be able to do it here. Unfortunately, we do have to go to break. We've got to wrap this part up, but I do want to get you back in here because I want to get more into the virtual QB training that you do. What's the easiest way for our listeners to connect with you so that they can get maybe that first conversation? And I know that's the free part of it is finding out who you are, but how do they connect with you, Vic, in getting that at least under their belt to begin this whole process?
I appreciate that. They can do one of two things. One, they can go to Facebook and they can just type in Vic Penn, VICPENN. The other thing they can do is they can go to virtualqbtraining.com, and the website is designed to take them right through the process. And I offer an initial free consultation with the family, with the quarterback or with the mom and dad. And I speak with them on the phone to find out the situation. But the best way to do it is either to go to the website or go to Facebook, and it directs them to me from there. My phone number is area code 850-903-1845. They can call me also, but the website is the best way because it really takes them through the process, and it helps them if they follow the website, like if they're reading a book, then it's designed to educate them as to why virtual training, in my opinion, is better than one-on-one training with someone that's there with them on the field because of the film aspect of it. It boils down to the film and being able to watch on video.
Well, Vic, we greatly appreciate it, man, not only for the time that you gave us tonight, but the time you played with the Gamecocks, of course, in Florida, made your way to Kansas. You gave a lot of storylines here, and it's not where you start, it's where you finish, and that past and pattern and the testimony, if you will, in between there has been amazing to hear. And, man, I tell you what, you ought to write a book on the top of it because you've been in, you've seen it, and you're living the dream daily, man. Thank you so much for coming in. We'll catch up off the air. I'm going to get you in here some more because I think what you're doing is huge, and we want to do what we can to help you out.
Absolutely. And listen, I thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate you considering me, and anything I can do to help or anything you need to talk to me at any time, just you have my number and just give me a call. And thank you very much for the time today.
You got it, buddy. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. The one and only Vic Penn. Of course, he played for the Gamecocks. He played for Central Florida. He played some arena ball. He played in Canada, played in Kansas. I mean, everywhere he played, he had multiple coaches, and he's taken all of that knowledge, and here he goes now with the one and only virtual QB training. It's one of a kind. You want to check it out. We got a quick break, come back. We're